In just 3 minutes, a homeowner would expose the most corrupt HOA scheme in neighborhood history. But first, Karen Mitchell would try to destroy his life over a mailbox. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as David Chan stepped out of his newly purchased home, coffee in hand, surveying his modest front yard. After years of apartment living, the 34-year-old software engineer had finally achieved his American dream, a 3-bedroom, colonial in what the realtor had called a quiet, well-maintained community. What David didn't know was that across the street, behind Venetian blinds, Karen Mitchell was already documenting his every move. Karen had ruled the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association with an iron fist for 7 years. At 52, she had transformed what was once a simple neighborhood committee into her personal kingdom. Her perfectly manicured lawn served as the gold standard. Her pristine white picket fence the envy of every resident, and the source of countless violation notices for those who dared fall short. Another one, Karen muttered to herself, photographing David as he placed his black mailbox at the curb. She flipped through her well-worn HOA handbook, a document that had mysteriously grown from 12 pages to 4 to 7 during her tenure. Section 4.7 clearly states, all mailboxes must be regulation blue or green. David's crime, his mailbox, was the wrong shade of black dot, but this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Karen's campaign against David escalated with military precision. She cited him for parking his Honda Civic 2 inches into his own driveway's decorative border. She issued violations for his garden hose being visible from the street. When David installed a small bird feeder, Karen declared it an unauthorized, decorative structure violating the community's aesthetic harmony standards. This is insane, David confided to his neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, a 78-year-old retired teacher who had lived in Willowbrook for 30 years. I'm getting fined almost daily for things that aren't even problems. Mrs. Rodriguez glanced around nervously before whispering, David, you need to be very careful. Karen has forced out 12 families in the past 3 years. The Johnsons, the Patels, the O'Briens, all good people who couldn't afford to fight her endless fines. But how is that legal? She's made it legal, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, her voice heavy with resignation. Karen's husband works at City Hall. Her brother-in-law is a lawyer. She's turned the HOA into her personal collection agency. Most people just sell and leave rather than fight. David's situation took a darker turn when he received a formal notice demanding $1,400 in accumulated fines for various violations. The letter, bearing Karen's signature as HOA president, gave him 30 days to pay or face legal action. I've reviewed your file, Karen announced at the next HOA meeting, her voice echoing through the community center as David sat in the front row, surrounded by neighbors who avoided eye contact. Mr. Chan has shown a consistent pattern of disregard for our community standards. His property values threatening violations include a proper mailbox installation, unauthorized parking, visible utility equipment, and unapproved lawn ornaments. David stood up, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Mrs. Mitchell, I've lived here for 2 months. I've followed every rule I was given. I've spent hundreds of dollars trying to comply with constantly changing requirements that seem to apply only to me. Karen's eyes narrowed. The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Chen. Perhaps this community isn't the right fit for someone who can't respect established standards. The room fell silent. David looked around at his neighbors. Good people, hard-working families, all sitting in fearful silence as they watched Karen systematically dismantle another resident's life. "I'm not going anywhere," David said quietly, "and I'm not paying these fraudulent fines." Karen's smile was ice cold. "Then you'll be hearing from our legal counsel." 3 days later, David discovered the true extent of Karen's power. A certified letter arrived from Peterson, Mitchell and Associates, Mitchell being Karen's brother-in-law. The law firm was demanding immediate payment of $2,400 plus $800 in legal fees, threatening foreclosure proceedings against his property. But David Chen hadn't built a successful career in software engineering by backing down from bullies. That evening, he began what would become the most comprehensive investigation into HOA corruption his county had ever seen. Using his technical skills, David started analyzing 7 years of HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and violation patterns. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Karen hadn't just been targeting individual homeowners. She had been systematically embezzling funds, manipulating elections, and using fabricated violations to force out residents who questioned her authority. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez, tired of watching her community being destroyed, had been secretly recording HOA meetings for years, hidden in her purse. A small digital recorder had captured Karen's private conversations, including one devastating exchange with her brother-in-law about maximizing fine revenue and eliminating troublemakers. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, David Chen walked into the law offices of Sarah Martinez, the most respected civil rights attorney in the county. He carried with him a briefcase containing financial records, audio recordings, and evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local government. "Mrs. Martinez," David said, spreading documents across her conference table, "I need to sue my HOA president, but not for harassment, for federal racketeering charges." The fight was about to begin. The fluorescent lights in Sarah Martinez's law office cast harsh shadows across the conference table as David Chen laid out his evidence against Karen Mitchell, attorney Martinez, a woman whose reputation for taking down corrupt officials was legendary, studied the documents with increasing intensity. "David, what you're showing me isn't just HOA abuse," Martinez said, her voice grave. "This is organized crime masquerading as community governance." The evidence was staggering. David's forensic analysis revealed that over 7 years, Karen had embezzled over $340,000 from the HOA's maintenance and reserve funds. She had been awarding landscaping contracts to shell companies owned by her relatives, charging the community $8,000 monthly for security services that consisted of her teenage nephew, driving through the neighborhood twice a week, and inflating legal fees through her brother-in-law's firm. But the most damning discovery was Karen's systematic displacement strategy. David had uncovered email chains between Karen and her inner circle, plotting to force out homeowners who owned property she wanted to flip or sell to her friends at below-market prices. "Look at this," David said, pulling up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "Every family that's been forced out in the past 3 years owned homes on premium lots. Karen's friends bought 12 of those properties at foreclosure auctions for 60% below market value." Martinez leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "This isn't just embezzlement, David. This is racketeering, mail fraud, and conspiracy. We're talking federal crimes." But Karen Mitchell wasn't going down without a fight. 2 days after David filed his counterclaim, his world began to unravel. He arrived at work to find his boss, Jennifer Walsh, waiting in his office with HR representatives. "David, we need to talk," Jennifer said, her face troubled. "We received some very concerning information about you yesterday." Karen had called David's employer, claiming he was under investigation for financial fraud and harassment of elderly neighbors. She had sent copies of her fabricated violation notices, painting David as an unstable individual who was terrorizing his community. "I can't have this kind of controversy affecting our client relationships," Jennifer explained. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending resolution of these legal issues." David's stomach dropped. Without his income, he couldn't afford to fight Karen's legal machine. It was exactly what she had planned. But Karen had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez. That evening, as David sat in his kitchen contemplating surrender, his doorbell rang. Mrs. Rodriguez stood on his porch, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were 15 other Willowbrook residents, including several David had never spoken to. "We're tired of being afraid," Mrs. Rodriguez announced. "It's time to fight back." One by one, David's neighbors shared their stories. The Patel family had been forced to sell after Karen cited them for culturally inappropriate garden decorations. Their small statue of Ganesha. The O'Brien family faced $4,000 in fines for their son's basketball hoop, which Karen claimed violated recreational equipment restrictions that didn't exist in the original HOA documents. "She destroyed our marriage," confessed Tom Bradley, a quiet man who lived 3 streets over. "The constant stress, the legal fees, the threats, my wife couldn't take it anymore. She moved back to her sister's place in Ohio." Mrs. Rodriguez handed David a manila envelope. "There's more, David, much more." Inside were photocopies of Karen's personal financial records, obtained through a friend who worked at Karen's bank. The documents revealed something shocking. Karen had been depositing HOA funds directly into her personal accounts, then using fake invoices to justify the transfers. But the most explosive discovery came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, a private investigator hired by one of Karen's previous victims, had been conducting surveillance on the HOA president for months. His footage revealed Karen breaking into homeowners' yards at night, moving property markers to create encroachment violations, and even damaging sprinkler systems to justify mandatory emergency repairs through her husband's contracting company. "She's been manufacturing violations," Webb explained to David and Martinez during their next meeting. "I have her on camera placing trash in people's yards, then photographing it the next morning as evidence of improper waste disposal." The evidence was overwhelming, but Karen's next move nearly destroyed everything. 3 weeks before their court date, David received a call that made his blood run cold. Mrs. Rodriguez had been rushed to the hospital after suffering a severe allergic reaction. The 78-year-old woman, who had no history of allergies, had mysteriously become violently ill after eating cookies left on her doorstep. The doctors say it was a massive reaction to shellfish extract. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered from her hospital bed, "But David, I've eaten shellfish my whole life. This wasn't an accident." Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed a figure in dark clothing leaving the package at Mrs. Rodriguez's door at 3 a.m. The figure's height and build matched Karen Mitchell perfectly. "She's trying to silence witnesses," Martinez told David as they reviewed the hospital reports. "This case just became attempted assault, possibly attempted murder, but Karen's desperation would prove to be her undoing. In her rush to intimidate witnesses, she had made increasingly reckless moves, leaving a digital trail that would seal her fate." The night before the trial, David received a text message from an unknown number. "Drop the case, or your house burns down. Last warning." David forwarded the message to Martinez, who immediately contacted the FBI. Phone records would later reveal the text came from a burner phone, purchased with Karen's credit card. As David lay awake that final night, he thought about all the families Karen had destroyed, all the dreams she had shattered for her own greed. Tomorrow, in front of a federal judge, he would expose the truth. But first, Karen Mitchell would make one final, devastating mistake that would destroy her in exactly 3 minutes. The federal courthouse buzzed with unusual energy as David Chen walked through the metal detectors, flanked by attorney Sarah Martinez and a growing crowd of Willowbrook residents, who had come to witness the confrontation they had waited years to see. Judge Patricia Williams, known for her no-nonsense approach to corruption cases, presided over what would become the most explosive HOA trial in county history. Karen Mitchell sat at the defendant's table with her brother-in-law, attorney Robert Mitchell, their confidence palpable despite the mountain of evidence arrayed against them. Karen had dressed for battle in a sharp navy suit, her perfectly styled hair and cold smile projecting the same intimidating presence that had terrorized her neighborhood for 7 years. Your Honor, Robert Mitchell began his opening statement. My client is the victim of a malicious campaign by a disgruntled homeowner who cannot accept reasonable community standards. Mr. Chen has fabricated these allegations to avoid paying legitimate fines for clear violations of established HOA regulations. Judge Williams studied the case files as Robert Mitchell painted David as an unstable troublemaker who had harassed elderly neighbors and made terrorist threats against the community. The attorney's strategy was clear: discredit David's character and dismiss the evidence as revenge fantasies. But Sarah Martinez has spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Your Honor, over the next hour, we will prove that Karen Mitchell has operated a criminal enterprise disguised as a homeowners association. Martinez announced she has embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars, manufactured false violations, and systematically terrorized residents to steal their homes. The first witness was David himself. Under Martinez's questioning, he methodically presented his financial analysis, showing how Karen had diverted HOA funds through fake contracts and inflated legal fees. His software engineer's precision and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Robert Mitchell's aggressive cross-examination attempts. Mr. Chen, isn't it true that you've been obsessed with my client since moving to Willowbrook? Robert Mitchell demanded. No, sir. I became concerned when I received $2,400 in fines for violations that don't exist in the original HOA documents. But you admit you had a black mailbox when regulations clearly state. David interrupted. Could you show me where in the original 1987 HOA covenant it mentions mailbox colors? Robert Mitchell fumbled through his papers. The original covenant, entered into evidence, contained no such restriction. Karen had invented the rule years later. The courtroom tension escalated when Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez took the stand. Despite her recent hospitalization, the 78-year-old woman spoke with fierce determination about Karen's reign of terror. She told me personally that she was going to clean out the undesirable elements from our neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez testified. When I asked what she meant, she said, old people who ask too many questions and foreigners who don't appreciate American property values. Robert Mitchell's objection was overruled, and Mrs. Rodriguez continued, I've been recording HOA meetings for 3 years because I knew something illegal was happening. Martinez played audio recordings that stunned the courtroom. Karen's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing with her inner circle how to maximize fine revenue and expedite the removal process for target properties. But the most damaging recording came from a private conversation between Karen and her husband. The Chen property is worth $150,000 more than he paid. If we can force him out, your cousin can flip it within 6 months. We just need a pile-on. Enough violations to make him give up. Judge Williams leaned forward, her expression darkening as she listened to Karen casually discussing the destruction of families, lives for profit. The courtroom erupted when Martinez called her surprise. Witness, Marcus Webb, the private investigator whose surveillance footage showed Karen manufacturing violations. The video evidence was devastating. Karen breaking into yards, moving property stakes, and even dumping trash to create violations. But Karen's attorney wasn't finished. In a desperate move, Robert Mitchell called Karen to testify in her own defense. Mrs. Mitchell, how do you respond to these allegations? Karen's composure finally cracked. Your Honor, I've dedicated 7 years to maintaining property values in Willowbrook Estates. Every fine, every violation notice, every legal action was justified under our community standards. Mr. Chen is a disruptive element who, Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Williams interrupted. Are you familiar with the original 1987 HOA covenant? Of course, Your Honor. Martinez stood up, holding a thick document. Your Honor, this is the original 12-page covenant signed by all original homeowners. The defendant has been enforcing a 47-page document that was never legally ratified by the community. The courtroom fell silent. Karen's face went pale as she realized her fatal error. Judge Williams examined both documents. Mrs. Mitchell, who authorized these additional 35 pages of regulations, the whole board approved all amendments through proper procedures. I'm looking at meeting minutes. Mrs. Mitchell, there's no record of community votes. For these amendments, who wrote these additional rules? Karen's voice barely rose above a whisper. I drafted them to clarify existing standards. So you personally created regulations that don't exist in the legal covenant, then used those fabricated rules to fine residents thousands of dollars? The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds before Karen whispered, yes, it had taken exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds for Karen Mitchell to destroy herself on the witness stand. But Martinez wasn't finished. She presented evidence of the threatening text message sent to David, traced directly to Karen's credit card and cell phone tower records. Bank statements showing Karen's personal deposits of HOA funds, email chains proving the conspiracy to force out specific families. Robert Mitchell sat slumped in his chair, knowing his client had just confessed to federal racketeering charges on the record. Judge Williams called for a brief recess, but everyone in that courtroom knew the verdict was inevitable. Karen Mitchell had built her empire on lies, intimidation, and fraud, and in less than 3 minutes of testimony, she had brought it all crashing down. The only question remaining was how many years she would spend in federal prison. Judge Patricia Williams returned to her bench after a 20-minute recess, her expression grave as she surveyed the packed courtroom. Karen Mitchell sat rigid at the defendant's table, her earlier confidence replaced by the hollow stare of someone watching their entire world collapse. David Chen held his breath, surrounded by neighbors who had waited years for this moment of reckoning. After reviewing the evidence presented today, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. This court finds overwhelming proof of systematic fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud. Mrs. Mitchell, your own testimony has confirmed that you knowingly created and enforced fabricated regulations to extort money from homeowners. The courtroom remained silent as the judge continued. The evidence shows you embezzled $342 from the Willowbrook Estates HOA, manufactured violations to force residents from their homes, and threatened witnesses to obstruct justice. This court awards Mr. Chen $150,000 in damages plus legal fees, and orders the immediate dissolution of all fabricated HOA regulations. Karen's sob echoed through the courtroom as the reality hit her. But Judge Williams wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is referring this case to the FBI for federal prosecution on charges of racketeering, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Mrs. Mitchell, you are remanded to federal custody pending trial. As federal marshals approached Karen's table, she suddenly stood up, her composure completely shattered. Wait, you don't understand. I wasn't the only one. This goes so much deeper than... Her brother-in-law grabbed her arm, hissing, Karen, shut up. But desperation had made Karen reckless. No, Robert, I'm not going down alone for this. Judge Williams raised her hand for silence. Mrs. Mitchell, anything you say can and will be used against you. Do you wish to continue? Sarah Martinez exchanged glances with David. They had expected victory, but not this, Your Honor. Karen said, her voice breaking, I have evidence that this conspiracy involves city officials, the mayor's office, and at least 6 other HOA presidents in the county. We were all working together. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Robert Mitchell slumped in his chair, knowing his client had just implicated herself in an even larger criminal enterprise. Over the next hour, as Karen desperately tried to save herself by exposing her co-conspirators, the true scope of the corruption emerged. She revealed a county-wide network of corrupt HOA officials working with city planners to systematically force out homeowners from valuable properties. The scheme involved real estate developers, city council members, and even the county assessor's office. Judge Williams, Karen pleaded, I have recordings, bank records, email chains proving all of this. I can give you Mayor Davidson, council members Torres and Walsh, and developer Marcus Steinberg. They were the ones who taught us how to do this. David stared in shock as Karen revealed that Willowbrook Estates was just one of 14 communities being systematically looted through fraudulent HOA activities. The conspiracy had generated over $2.8 million in illegal profits over 5 years. But the biggest twist was yet to come. As FBI agents arrived to collect Karen's evidence, she made one final, stunning revelation. Your Honor, David Chen was never a random target. He was specifically chosen because his property sits on the planned route for the new interstate extension. The city needed those 12 houses demolished for the highway project, and we were paid $50,000 per family. We successfully removed the blood drain from David's face. His dream home wasn't just under attack from a corrupt HOA. It was marked for destruction as part of a massive government infrastructure project that would have made Karen and her conspirators wealthy beyond imagination. Judge Williams ordered an immediate federal investigation into what would become known as the Interstate HOA Conspiracy. Over the following months, the FBI's probe uncovered the largest municipal corruption scheme in the state's history. 6 months later, David Chen stood in the same courtroom as Judge Williams delivered the final sentences. Karen Mitchell received 8 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution. Mayor Davidson got 12 years. 6 HOA presidents across the county received sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Williams announced that the federal investigation had uncovered constitutional violations in the interstate planning process. The highway extension was permanently canceled, and David's neighborhood was designated a protected residential zone. Mr. Chen, Judge Williams said as the proceedings concluded, Your courage in fighting this corruption has saved not just your community, but potentially thousands of families across the county from similar schemes. As David walked out of the courthouse, Mrs. Rodriguez, now fully recovered, hugged him tightly. "You did it, David. You saved us all." The Willowbrook Estates community celebrated that evening with a block party, the first in 7 years where residents weren't afraid of receiving violation notices. Children played freely in yards that had been scrutinized and criticized for so long. Basketball hoops returned to driveways. Garden decorations reflected the beautiful diversity of the neighborhood's families. David's black mailbox still stood at his curb, now a symbol of resistance against tyranny disguised as community standards. But perhaps the most poetic justice came 2 years later, when the Willowbrook Estates HOA, now democratically reformed and stripped of its fabricated regulations, voted unanimously to name the community center the Elena Rodriguez Community Justice Center, in honor of the brave elderly woman who had secretly recorded the evidence that brought down a criminal empire. Karen Mitchell's house, seized by the federal government, was sold at auction. The buyer, a young immigrant family with children, a basketball hoop, and a beautiful garden statue that reflected their cultural heritage. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring that communities remain places where ordinary people can live extraordinary lives, free from the fear of those who would abuse power for personal gain. The black mailbox remains a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can topple the mightiest tyrannies. If you're still here, I'd really like to know what this reminded you of or what you would have done in my place. And hey, if this story hit something in you and you want to support the channel, that little thanks button's always there. Thanks for hanging out. We're HOA Confessional Stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.